Connecting to our family history and ancestry helps us to understand who we are today, and the study of genealogy has exploded with the availability of online resources and the downtime at home many have had during the pandemic. Julie Thompson spoke with professional genealogical researcher Mike Brophy about this burgeoning field.
I'm pleased to welcome to the set today Michael Brophy, who is a genealogist among other things. Michael, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today on Local Matters.
Thank you, Julie, for having me.
Now let's talk a little bit about how did you get into genealogy, and it's so much more than some people might think. What are the different aspects of it and how did you get into it?
Well, first part of that question, how I got into it was, about 20 years ago. My retired father and I got together after a family wedding and started exploring the father's side of the family. It's kind of unusual because usually mothers and daughters get involved with it, but in my case, it was a father-son project for my recently retired dad after a cousin on my mother's side did a great history of our family history on my mother's side. And when I asked my dad, I said, what do we know about the Brophy side? He said, not much. And that sort of set us on our way towards the genealogy addiction or bug or whatever you want to call it. And several years later, I started taking all kinds of courses and continuing education to sharpen my skills and use my business experience to put together a business relating to genealogy. Second part of your question, Julie, about what genealogy is all about. I tend to divide it into two different areas. Number one is where we sort of do the traditional genealogy, tracing back our ancestors. If you're in Plymouth, of course, we all know about the Mayflower Society. And there's also another part of genealogy called forensic genealogy, which has to do with tracking down living people for legal purposes, such as heirs to estates, tracking down heirs for real estate, for putting together title issues, messed up title issues regarding land. Down south, there's a lot of forensic genealogists who get involved with finding heirs for drilling for oil and gas rights and things like that. So there are dual citizenship applications. That's a legal application as well that genealogists get involved with, helping folks to find their dual citizenship. So that's sort of the legal living person part, forensic part of genealogy that is a growing field now.
Sure. Now, when you talked about oil and things like that, there's an awful lot of land, obviously, that's owned by someone, and sometimes you don't know who owns land. And if there's something found on that land, minerals, gold, silver, oil, gas, is it the responsibility of whoever's going to come mine that or work on that land to find out the actual legal people that own the rights to that land?
Yeah, who have an interest in it, and not my area of specialty of forensic genealogy. Of course, you can imagine that this is big business down in the Dakotas, where they're fracking for natural gas, or Oklahoma or Texas, where you're drilling for oil. Not so much in our part of the country, but my understanding is from colleagues who do that kind of work is that it's involved with tracking down the heirs so that the heirs can be notified by a lawyer who specializes in this, that their land is being drilled on, and they make a business deal based on who has the ownership rights of that particular land for oil rights or for mining for minerals, natural resources.
Right. So you can find out, you can trace back to the person or people that might be involved. Do you also have to have some sort of a legal background to understand the ramifications of finding or not finding people?
Yeah, I mean, as an example, in a probate estate, if somebody dies without a will, that's called dying intestate, meaning that the person did not testify as to their wills, as to their wishes of the disposition of their real property, their personal property. So the laws differ as to who would inherit in a case like that when there is no will. Usually, in Massachusetts, certainly the spouse inherits first. They take 100%. Then the children take. Then the parents will take, and brothers and sisters and nieces and nephews, so on down the line. That in Massachusetts is pretty straightforward, but in other parts of the country, there's all kinds of divisions relating to the degree of relative that is left alive
Right.
in all kinds of different states. And
Okay.
that's the legal part that a forensic genealogist needs to know if they're going to practice forensic genealogy in that state.
Sure. Now, it also says on your website that you do private investigations. Now, what would that be for example?
Yeah, I mean, typically I think folks identify private investigators with somebody who's tailing the,
Yeah.
the cheating spouse, so to speak. That's the old
Yeah, and that's not true.
stereotype for it. But private investigation involves so much more than that. And in the case of forensic genealogy, a lot of folks will sort of associate a private investigator or licensed private investigator like myself to interview people who are heirs to estates, folks who have some sort of a background in law enforcement, which I've worked for a private investigator before, which is why I'm licensed in Massachusetts. As well as private investigators do have access to information through proprietary databases that only licensed PIs have access to, the general public does not.
Sure.
For tracking down living people for legal purposes,
Okay.
like estates and real estate, things
Now,
like that, tracking heirs.
I have a question about probably in the last 20 years or so, with the advent of DNA being so much more readily available and talked about in databases everywhere. How has that changed the whole subject matter of genealogy? And it obviously dovetails with medical conditions and things like that. How does that play into what you do?
Yeah, DNA has really transformed things, particularly in the last 10 years or so. There's one famous genealogist who specializes in the crime aspects of matching up DNA to old crime scenes, to getting DNA samples from close relatives or even suspects of folks who had committed heinous crimes. The famous, her name is C.C. Moore, and she tracked down, I'm not sure she was involved with that case in particular, but there was a case out in California of a fellow who was called the Golden State Killer.
Oh, right, yeah.
And during the late 70s, he went up and down the California coast and raped and murdered about, 15, 20, maybe even more women. And that case broke about 5 years ago, in which they tracked down DNA that was left at the scene to him, and now he is a resident of a California state prison
Right.
Due to DNA.
So how does DNA play into what you do, though?
Okay, so when it comes to genealogy, there are quote called non-paternal events, in which folks can upload their DNA into a popular database like Ancestry.com, 23andMe, MyHeritage, a few others. And if your DNA, it will tell you based on on how much of a DNA match that you have, if you are related to people in the database. So in these cases where dad had a child out of wedlock or something and it was never talked about, there's been dozens and dozens of cases of folks who've been able to get in touch and network over these DNA databases so that they could find a lost father or lost relative in some way.
Or someone that you were separated from, a family member that you lost touch with. That must be a wonderful thing to be able to.
Folks finding their birth parents, adopted persons finding their birth father, their birth mother, who they may not have ever been contacted before. So in a sense, it's really helped reunite families with this new DNA technology.
So there's a whole bunch of different things that you can do with what you do, and you also offer lectures and workshops and I would assume they're on specific subjects. And most people want to go see you because they have a specific question, right, or a quest that they're after. Is that true?
Yeah, and that's the favorite part. I do lecture on a wide variety of subject matters. You can check out my website if you like. But my favorite part in doing it and going down to Plymouth on a regular basis is a lot of fun. Did it in person there recently. And the questions afterwards are the most fun. I mean, I deliver my speech, my talk on whatever it happens to be. But talking to folks about their ancestry and their questions is what I think is most meaningful to them.
Right.
And fun for me to answer too.
Sure. And be able to be that resource to them must be wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you have a fascinating job. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll put your information about how to get in touch with you and how to watch what you do. And fascinating. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely, Julie. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. You can learn more about Brophy Professional Genealogy and Heir Research at brophygen.com.
If you've enjoyed this video by The Local Scene, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. Thank you for watching.